Dear friends in Portugal, I would much rather be in your country than sitting in my living room in Bavaria and speaking to a screen. We are losing, actually, in this technological time, we are losing contact to our body, to the physical, to the body. And I think this is a dangerous development. Anyhow, we are happy that we have the internet. If we didn't have it and we are in lockdown, there would be not much left of communication. So what there is, we are thankful for it. As you all know, the family is under severe attack. The family is the cornerstone, the foundation of society. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, after the Second World War, stated the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. What makes up a family? Since time immemorial, it is the union between a man and a woman who bring up children. Of course, there have always been different structures of family in history and in different cultures. And I'm a sociologist, and sociologists have always studied the difference of family structure in different cultures. But always it was man and woman united to bring up children. These structures and norms of family have been radically changed by political strategy in the last half century, and they are still being changed in incredible speed. We are not at the end of this. The pressure to accept these new norms is immense. It is so strong that we can see a loss of common sense and a loss of what people just see to accept the reality of what is in front of their eyes, that is their body, and their conscience. The pressure is so strong that these basic human capabilities are not really functioning very well. We all have a father and a mother. We exist through the merging of sperm of the father and the egg of the mother. Their genes make up who we are. We have an ontological longing that we are brought up by our mother and our father, and that our mother and our father stay together for life. This longing is in every single child because we exist because of the merging of father and mother, the genes of father and mother. The merging of egg and sperm until very recently happened only through the sexual act of a man and a woman. Man is created with free will and not bound by instinct. He has liberated, so-called liberated his sexuality from the confines of bonding and biology. He can satisfy his sexual drive with several partners, with no partner at all, with images on the screen, with a person of the same sex or the other sex, or many, or both together, with an animal or a robot. He can, since 1978, create a human being without the sexual act in a laboratory, buy the egg or the sperm, and rent the uterus of a woman. All these new moral and technical possibilities break down the family. Family needs a stable marriage between a man and a woman. Family depends on monogamy of husband and wife. This is what every child desires. This is what our own heart desires when we are in love. This is easy to understand, but not so easy to achieve. An eye-opener for what is happening in our society, to me, was at the beginning of the third millennium, at the beginning of 2000, a book by an English author called J.D. Unwin. I spell it Uniwin. And in 1934, he published a book called Sex and Culture, Oxford University Press. It was a big anthropological study. And Unwin was interested of the relationship between the height of a culture and the sexual morality or the sexual norms. And what he found is this: high culture can only exist with strict sexual norms, that is, monogamy and virginity before marriage. If a culture gives up these limitations, it steps down from the stage of history within 3 generations. That to me was a real eye-opener, and I looked around and said, oh, this may be true. We witness the dissolution of sexual limitations, and we witness the disintegration of family and the disintegration of society. You are in Portugal, the nation of Fatima. I've last year for a few hours only had the privilege to visit Fatima, where the greatest apparition of Our Lady happened in 1917. And probably you know that Sister Lucia, who died in 2005, wrote in a letter to Cardinal Caffarra, whom I still met just before he died. He was the founder of the Institute for Marriage or Family, founded by John Paul II. And in a letter, she wrote to him, quote, "There comes a time when the final battle between our Lord and Satan will be about marriage and family. Anybody who fights for the sacredness of marriage and family will be attacked and persecuted." We are in the middle of that battle. In an interview in 2008, Cardinal Caffarra said, quote, "The relationship between man and woman and between the generations is the foundation stone of creation. If you move the stone, the whole edifice breaks down. We have come to that point. We are moving the stone of the fact that man, the human being, is created as man and woman. And there's nothing we can change about it. We can mess it up, but we cannot change it. And that the attack goes to that cornerstone of human existence. So how did all this come about? Something mad. It is really to the brink of madness. What is happening doesn't happen from one day to the other. They are trailblazers of the sexual revolution. And I want to give you a few names. I have my second chapter in my book deals with them, and more of the names I mention now. I mention the most important ones. It actually started with the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a revolution against the church and already for sexual liberation. Then this revolution went sort of undercover for a while, but turned up again, came to the surface again at the beginning of the 20th century. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of the philosophers who were influential. He said goodbye to natural law and proclaimed the autonomous individual who defines his own identity. Probably he didn't dream that we would say we can define whether you're man and woman, but he brought this train of thought into the consciousness of people. This is a fundamental aberration of the philosophy of Aristotle, who saw man as a social being and creation as endowed with meaning. Our body, the creation, everything created has an inward meaning, which Aristotle called telos, an inner aim that is to be discovered and fulfilled by man. Then, of course, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who saw in the antagonism between man and woman the first class conflict, which had to be overcome by demolishing the family. It was an outright attack at the church. As you all know, he called religion the opium of the people, and he had the intention to destroy the family. It's in the Communist Manifesto of 1848. Sigmund Freud, the founder of deep psychology, who described the human, he had a certain anthropology, and he described the human being as a slave of sexual suppression. Everything he described about the human being was a function of sexual suppression, and he began to put into our minds that it is necessary to liberate our sexual trieb, our sexual drive from our Über-Ich, from our, what's the word for Über-Ich? The part which controls us, super ego or something like this. I don't know, the super ego probably. Very influential Simone de Beauvoir. She was the mistress of the famous philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, an atheist philosopher. Actually, I don't have to say atheist because all of these people are atheists, and all of these people lean to the left or even were even members of the Communist Party. It's common to all of the sexual revolutionists that they're on the left side, that they have no connection to God. Instead, they fight against God and, of course, against the church that proclaims the morality which is necessary for a high culture and for family. Simone de Beauvoir said this in Nietzsche, the gender theory, one is not born as a woman, one becomes a woman. Now, how much later is it? She wrote in the 60s of the last century. No, actually, her book was published in I think in 1949 or something like this. We are at a point where we say the sex of a child is ascribed to the child. It is not natural. It is not biology. Somebody says when the baby is born, this is a girl, or this is a boy, and that's what we all believe. But in reality, the person is free. This is where we have come to within something like 80 years. She also said, you can reconstruct female identity in order to overcome patriarchal oppression and gain power over men. The battle cry of Simone de Beauvoir was, get out of the slavery of motherhood. Motherhood is a slavery. The result, the demographic crisis. Alfred Kinsey, still respected as the father of sexology, who faked service and sexually abused babies for his research. He counted how many orgasms a baby can have in what time. By showing how many, he wanted to prove to the whole world that children need to be introduced to sexual arousal and satisfaction. This is the basic paradigm of the sexual education of the comprehensive sexual education of our time. His report on the sexual behavior of the male, I remember when this was published, and it had a huge influence. He showed that the transgression of sexual norms was normal. Everybody does it. Everybody has side affairs. Every man has homosexual affairs. So we should change the law in order to adapt to the so-called nature or the normal, so-called normal behavior of the male, not the man, but of the male, which sort of brings it down to the animal level. Kinsey was an extreme sadomasochist and a homosexual, and he had the greatest pornographic collection one could find anywhere. Another interesting man is John Money, spelled as you spell money. He was a psychiatrist at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. In the 60s, Money opened the first clinic for sex change operations. His success was based on an experiment with a pair of twin brothers. One of them, Bruce Reimer, had his penis injured in a botched circumcision. His parents subjected him to sex reassignment surgery and brought him up as a girl under Dr. Money's therapeutic guidance. The boy rebelled right from the start and was tormented by suicidal thoughts. At 13, when he finally found out what had happened to him, that he was actually a boy, he instantly decided to live as a boy and changed his name to David. He married, but could never find peace with his body. At the age of 38, he killed himself. 2 years earlier, his twin brother, Brian, had ended his life with an overdose of pill. That is the success story of John Money, who shouted into the world that you can, by operation, by hormones, change your sex. That is the foundation of what is happening now, and it is happening to a huge rise in children who demand that they change their sex. Judith Butler, rhetoric and philosophy professor at California and Columbia University, published her breakthrough book with the title Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity in 1990. As proclaimed in the title, her aim was to deconstruct the identity of man and woman to create so-called gender fluidity, and thus dissolve so-called compulsory heterosexuality and so-called phallogocentrism. Yeah, she said there is nothing stable like man and woman. There's fluidity. You can be anything in between, and you can change. When you're a woman, you can change to a man and the other way around. She wrote this book in 1990. Now we have 2020, 30 years later, and I suppose you are all aware what is now happening with transgender in sports, with children, with transgender sex change operations, with the hype with girls who all of a sudden say, my happiness depends on changing my sex into a man, and thus ruining their life. Amazingly, a woman who proclaims these kind of aims, which are really strange. I mean, if later historians will look at what kind of thoughts were around, it will be hard for them to believe that she was successful. But she's extremely successful because the elites of power gave her power. She's a member of the Rockefeller and Guggenheim Foundation and receives highly endowed rewards. In 2015, even the honorary doctorate of the University of Fribourg in Switzerland. The seeds of these atheistic, communist, anarchistic thinkers materialized in a movement that considered the destruction of moral limitations of sexuality as liberation. The student rebellion of the late 1960s set out to destroy marriage and family, quite directly, quite openly. They propagated sex with children, sex in front of children, and sex amongst children. Sexual activity in kindergarten is now the official program of sexual education in Germany, promoted by the United Nations and the European Union. Children are given corners, darkened corners, where they can separate themselves, where they can take off their clothes, where they can examine their body, use feathers and other things which are given to them to have sensuous pleasure. And this is called doctor games. And these are programs of the state. These are not radicals as they were in 1968 and later in that Kinderladen movement. No, these are official programs of the United Nations, the European Union, on the premise a child has a right to sexual activity from the very beginning, which is not founded by any kind of psychological science. This is just the hypothesis on which all this works. This movement is against reason, against science, against nature, against rationality. All these qualities are a foundation of the extremely wonderful and successful European culture. All this is the foundation of the European culture, and now the attack goes against all of this, and of course against old white men, who the young generation now says they are of no interest to us at all. There are some really very, very wonderful thinkers in the past, and I think please get acquainted with them and read them, even if your university courses may not invite you to do this. And of course, the main thrust of this movement is against Jesus Christ. What we see happening is it marches into a new kind of totalitarianism, into anarchistic violence, which we now see happening in the cities of the United States and in the cities of Germany. It's sort of rising that violence is kind of accepted. The state does not really, even in the USA and in Germany and other countries, there's not Chile, for instance, there is not a real stand up of the state to say we will not have this. The use of violence must be a prerogative of the state only and nobody else. If we want to have peace and law, the reign of law, we cannot allow any other kind of violence. So I come to a next part, from feminism to gender ideology. The cultural skateboard, so to speak, into the social chaos created by so-called identity politics was feminism. There were good reasons for a women's movement for equal rights. It was started 150 years ago by Catholic women who fought for the right to vote. Women and men are equal in dignity and potential, but they are not the same. They are complementary on the biological, psychological, and spiritual level, and in their ontological vocation. Women give life and nurture life by being mothers. Men give their lives in battle. What richness and joy if that complementarity is lived out in a good marriage. What a disaster if the differences are taken out on each other in a power struggle on the personal level or in the society as a whole. The necessary movement, the movement for equal rights, was necessary. It perverted when women began to fight for sexual self-determination and against marriage. That is against marriage and the responsibility for children. This became possible through the legalization of contraception and abortion. Until the beginning of the 20th century, I think it was 1924 or 28, within the Christian churches, contraception was not allowed. It was totally agreed on that a Christian could not use that. This now seems to us quite impossible even to think, because we have all got totally used to it, and children are instructed in contraception even before puberty in school. It became possible through the legalization of contraception and abortion. Margaret Sanger invested her life in this battle. She founded the Eugenic American Birth Control League, the forerunner of international Planned Parenthood. At the beginning of this battle, abortion was legalized in certain defined cases. Now, the left, the Democrats in the USA, and all left and liberal parties vote and battle for the unlimited human right to abortion right up to the time of birth. I've just written a new book. It was published a few weeks ago. It's called The Abandoned Generation. Children are abandoned by the society and by mothers and fathers. They are left alone. In it, I describe the methods of abortion. We easily speak about the numbers of abortion, and there's a fight for the freedom to abort, and here the laws are stricter and so on. Have you ever looked at the methods, the true methods of abortion? What a child goes through that is killed in the womb? I will not look it up. You will find it in the internet. What is done, it is just butchery. It is extremely brutal. The child is torn to pieces. The mess that is taken out of the womb of the mother, the doctor has to find whether all the bones of the little baby are there. Please look at it. Find out what is really going on. To go through this fog, which allows our time to demand a human right for abortion. Where have we come to? You know, human rights were a really noble idea in 1948. And now there's a battle on this earth for the right for abortion. The human right for abortion. Enforcing this social policy required a new word. No, sorry, I left something out. The decisive knockdown of the cornerstone of creation, I already mentioned that, was led by Judith Butler with her book, again, the title, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity. Judith Butler was a proclaimed lesbian. Her passion was to deconstruct the binary sexual identity of man and woman and what she called compulsory heterosexuality. Enforcing this social policy required a new word, because language doesn't just reflect reality. Language creates reality. Gender was the magic word. At the Women Conference of the United Nations in 1995 in Beijing, the radical feminists of the United Nations did everything they possibly could, used any kind of manipulative measure to get the word gender into the official documents. Up to then, it was, what is your sex? And it was clear you are asking, is it man or is it woman? But a new word was needed to say sex is the biological side, which is uninteresting to you. Gender is the gender, the sex you can choose and you can change, and there's gender fluidity. So I admire the intelligence of these women to realize that language is the vehicle to change society. So they came up with this word gender, which already existed in the English language, but was not used for that purposes. With a far-reaching strategic agenda and the adoption of this movement by the rich and powerful of this earth, the feminist and the LGBTIQ movement managed to infiltrate into the power positions in all areas of society: United Nations and European Union, university, education, media, judiciary. The European Court of Human Rights, by the way, is undermined by activists of NGOs of George Soros, which just had been documented in soundly documented in new research. So no wonder that we get very strange judgments from the so-called Human Court of Human Rights. With this movement, the gender and feminist movement merging together with the homosexual movement also, there was just one problem. If there is no such thing as sexual identity, then the feminists fighting for female supremacy have a problem. There's a choice of expanding women's power at the expense of men, or of completely abolishing binary and sexual identity. If there's no such thing as woman identity, why fight for women? Yeah, so there is a contradiction. Butler was aware of this problem, but she thought that, quote, strategically and transitionally, the woman movement can be used for deconstructive purposes. She knew exactly, yeah? She said, there's this big movement, everybody has to agree that women are the victims of this world, and we have to get the women into power positions. Nobody can say anything against that, and get the children into daycare and get the women into the jobs. So that is an active movement, and it's kind of the skateboard on which we can use strategically and transitionally. Once the gender identity has been deconstructed, maybe we don't even need the feminist movement anymore. Let us sum it up and look at the cornerstones of this whole process. The French revolutionists enthroned autonomous reason as a goddess in the form of a prostitute. They killed thousands of priests and attempted to wipe out the church. Écraser l'infâme was the battle cry. After time of restoration, intelligent thinkers, I've mentioned a few, started to rock the Christian foundation of the European culture. The woman movement turned from the battle for equal rights, which was justified, to sexual emancipation. This leads to the destruction of marriage and family, the denigration of men, the abandonment of motherhood, even the fight for the human right to kill the baby in the womb. The LGBTIQ movement created gender ideology and went from triumph to triumph. From legalization of homosexual acts to same-sex partnership, same-sex marriage, adoption by same-sex couples, production of children in the laboratory, depriving them of their basic human right, which truly is a human right, the right to a biological mother and a biological father. As soon as all this was established by law, the next step followed: transgenderism, the right to change your sex by hormones or surgery, or not even do any changes, but just proclaim that we have a different, just declare that your sex is what your sex is, and that will be put into the documents. You just go to the official office and say, I say, from tomorrow onwards, I want to be a man, and they have to put it into your passport. Which is, I mean, can a society become more mad than this? It is astonishing that during the last few years, we have is it astonishing that during the last few years, we have an explosion of cases, mostly girls in puberty, who want to change their sex and are allowed to ruin their perfectly healthy bodies and their lives? We are witnessing and are in the midst of a top-down revolution, building a totalitarian society under the cloak of democracy and freedom. With the concept of revolution, we usually associate that it's a mass movement from down to the top. Yeah, people are so suffering, exploited, that they use violence to change the whole society. It usually arises from mass suffering at the bottom. This is different. This is from the top down. Was there a mass movement that demands to be freed from the unbearable burden of being born as a man or a woman and stuck for life in a male or female body? Was there a mass movement to say this has to be changed? Was there a mass movement to give same-sex partnerships the legal status of marriage? The opposite is true. There were millions on the streets in Paris, in France, but the power was with what was his name, the chancellor then, Hollande, and he had the power, so he ignored the millions on the street. Was there a mass movement to legally declare that there are 3 genders, not just man and woman, but a third gender, which in Germany is called divers, diverse, which the Supreme Court 3 years ago forced, said the parliament has to create a third category for human beings, diverse. And now all advertisement, if a business looks for a new employee, they have to say man, woman, diverse. There are not really very many people they can draw from if they want diverse people. No, there are not such movements. The revolution that is happening in our time is a top-down revolution. It is brought about by the elites of power and money who make use of sexual minorities and call their demands human rights. The visible objective, what we can see and prove, is the unified strategy of these elites to reduce the world population. However, a change in the value system of sexuality, marriage, and family overturns the social structure of society and creates chaos. Social chaos demands the ever-increasing intervention of the state. This slide into a new totalitarianism has now received an unprecedented acceleration through the corona pandemic. We have lost in German it's Rechtssicherheit, the certainty of law. We don't know where we are. We have to listen to the news. Are we allowed to travel tomorrow? Are we not allowed? Do I have to stay home? How many people can I invite? And so on. Can my children go to school? Do they have masks? No, they don't have to. And so on. We are constantly kept on our tiptoes. And the state is all of a sudden regulating our personal life in a way as it wasn't even possible in war conditions. This is now happening with Corona. And what makes me very, very doubtful to what is actually going on. As soon as you raise these doubts, somebody will call out you and say, this is, what's the word, theory, what is the word, conspiracy theory. Yeah, this is now the swear word. Immediately, if you think, well, what is happening here? They could shout at you and say, this is a conspiracy theory and you're a bad person if you believe that there's something going on a very high level. So why are critics excluded from YouTube and Facebook who say masks are unhealthy, who say the numbers are not right, the test doesn't prove anything? Why are these people not allowed to have an open discussion? That is amazing to my mind. The methods of this top-down revolution are very sophisticated. Of decisive importance is the abuse of language, which I already mentioned. I call it the political rape of language. This is very serious because we can only think through language. If language is distorted, we cannot think straight, and eventually our common sense becomes defunct, which we can see all around us. In the hands of political power holders, language deteriorates from an instrument to convey truth to an instrument of manipulation. The wolf wears sheepskin. The sheepskin are the concepts of freedom, tolerance, human rights, equality, diversity, and discrimination. We now experience that these concepts are undermined, so that freedom, tolerance, human rights, and equality are one-way streets for the demands of sexual minorities. The freedom of religion, a central achievement of Western society, is now in danger. We see cathedrals and churches are being burnt down, are being demolished, are being stuff written all over them. I think 3 churches in France are attacked every day, and this is an accelerating process. Freedom of religion is in conflict with the discrimination laws. If religious believers act on their convictions by refusing to support behavior which they believe to be wrong, they may be accused of discrimination. There are many lawsuits where freedom of religion was sacrificed to the non-discrimination demands of sexual minorities. The trick was the introduction of the concept of sexual orientation as a criterion of non-discrimination into the Amsterdam Treaty of the European Union in 1999. I say it again, we have human rights and they say you're not allowed to discriminate a person because of sex, because of disability, because of religion, because of race, and some other criteria, which we all agree to. Now something new happened. Sexual orientation was introduced into the Amsterdam Treaty in 1999, saying nobody can be discriminated because of sexual orientation. That was the door through which all the rest, which we are witnessing now, could happen. Again, incredible intelligence. The public hadn't an idea what was going on, but the activists knew very well that they were actually, that was a key to a revolution and a development which they intended. The social revolutionists work with clearly defined long-term aims. In 2007, which is now 13 years ago, so-called human rights experts met in the Indonesian town Yogyakarta and drew up the so-called 29 Yogyakarta principles. Again, I have a whole chapter in my book because I think it's a blueprint for reshaping all areas of society according to the agenda of the small minority of LGBT activists. Look it up in the internet, you will find it immediately. And it's radicalized every 10 years. There's now Yogyakarta plus 10, which is even more radical than Yogyakarta 2007. By the way, the man who was the mind behind this, O'Flaherty, his name is, a former priest from Ireland, who is also the mastermind of changing societies that they legalize same-sex marriage, was the mastermind behind the Yogyakarta principles. He is now the director of the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union. The principles demand the complete legal equality of any sexual orientation and identity. The 29 principles were presented in the United Nations building in Geneva, the Palace des Nations, thus pretending that it was an official document, but it is not at all official. It's individuals who put it up, but of course with the backing of the United Nations. You can fool the public. You give them the Palace of the UN Palace in Geneva, you let them present it, and then you have nations who understand, say, yes, this is our strategy too, and all of a sudden everybody thinks this is an official policy. It is not. It is basically a document of individuals, but a very influential blueprint for what is happening. The principles come with an activist guide to the Yogyakarta principles with concrete instructions how to change societies with different social and legal standards. It is easy to form an activist group in any country, train them, give them unlimited money and legal support for strategic litigation to change any culture, be it Western, Islamic, or traditional African, according to LGBTIQ principles. Now you find a group of homosexuals, transgender people, you train them, you give them money, you give them lawyers behind them, you tell them what kind of lawsuit they could take to the highest court, and give them best practices to change society. And it's all put down in this activist guide to the Yogyakarta principles, and the rest you will learn when you are trained. The success of the worldwide sexual revolution requires hiding behind accepted values until the point of no return, when all opposition can be suppressed. we have moved on in this process. At the beginning, it was tolerance, yeah, it was freedom, and now it's getting more and more into the open. This move into totalitarian suppression. This happens in three ways: pretending that the required changes of law are in accord with international law and putting pressure on national political bodies through the United Nations and the European Union. It's a highly complicated process, and they usually work with saying this is accepted international law, and the nations don't really realize that it's an act of manipulation very often. Oh, it's not 3 points I have here, I have 6 points. Reshaping the concept of human rights from a right that protects the life and dignity of every human being to the so-called rights of minorities. The original human rights is every human being, because it is a human being, has dignity and has certain rights which cannot be violated in any culture and any time. Those were human rights. Know that now they are adapted to force privileges of minorities under this title, this false title of human rights. Third point, funding LGBTIQ organizations with unlimited financial resources from the UN, EU, national governments, and private foundations like the Open Society of George Soros. Litigating court test cases at all levels in the name of human rights. What I mean are these cases which you probably know about, the baker who does wedding cakes, and he has to do a wedding cake for a homosexual marriage, and he says, I'm a Christian, I cannot do this, I'm sorry, I'm happy to serve you, but I cannot do this. You go next door and you will have your wedding cake. No, he's taken to court, up to the Supreme Court. He won this case, and after 4 years, you have nothing else to do but fight this legal battle. As soon as that had been settled at the highest level in the United States, the transgender people came and said, do a blue and pink transgender cake for us. He said, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian, I cannot do it. They started litigation again. So behind this is, look, all of you, look, if you do not comply, we will ruin your existence, and we will be relentless, and we will go on and on and on until you give up. That is the message. I've devoted a whole chapter, as I already said, to the Yogyakarta principles because they are a blueprint of what we are witnessing around the world. The top-down revolution of societies that once were founded on Christian principles of the common good, legality, objective science, and the respect for the life and dignity of every human person. This doesn't mean that we ever had an ideal society. The fallen human being always craves for power, wealth, and sex. That is why monks vow poverty, obedience, and chastity. Every generation has the task to keep up freedom, for freedom is always under pressure. What we see now is the rising of a new totalitarianism that appears in the mantle of freedom. Therefore, my book has the subtitle, Destruction of Freedom in the Name of Freedom. What does that mean for you, the young generation? What does it mean for you personally? Let us come back to the finding of the anthropologist J.D. Unwin. High culture can only exist with strict sexual restrictions, namely monogamy and virginity before marriage. If a culture gives up these limitations, it steps down from the stage of history within 3 generations. If a person gives up these limitations, It contributes to the breakdown of the family. And the chance that life will be unhappy is much, much greater than if you actually keep within these limitations. You have grown up in a sexualized society with pornography available with a few clicks. It seems to be normal to have sexual relationships before marriage and live together without the bond of marriage. Children and youth are actively pressured into sexual activity by the programs of the European Union and the United Nations, beginning in kindergarten. What do you want in your life? A good marriage? Faithfulness of your partner? A happy home for bringing up children? Growth of true love until the end of your life? Well, that means you have to become a strong person that has the strength to live against the mainstream, to form a vision of what you want in your life, of what you want your life to be, and make the necessary sacrifices to achieve your aims. It is sacrifice that opens the door to freedom. I am a Christian. I have become a Christian after walking on the wrong path for the greater part of my life. I know and experience that there is help from above if you ask for it. God bless you.